Welcome to Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. Actually, welcome to my backyard. Isn't that funny? Spend all this time, energy, money, effort, trying to get within 20 yards of a deer, and I step out the door of my office, and there she stands. She's still right there. She had two fawns in there eating from an apple tree right in the corner of my yard. So on today's episode, a little out of breath, sorry about that. I was finishing up a workout in my shop there. But on today's episode, I want to give you the second of the two previews that I promised on this new series that I'm producing for My Outdoor TV called Patterning Trophy Whitetails. So when we come back from break, I'll talk about it just a little bit, and then I'll let you watch this one. Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails is brought to you by Redneck Blinds, Code of Silence Apparel, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail App, Whitetail Institute, Research Equals Results, B3 Archery, Muddy Outdoors Tree Stands, Stealth Cam Trail Cameras, My Outdoor TV, and Hoyt. So episode 2 is about two case studies, two different bucks that I hunted that had opposite extremes. They're on different ends of the patterning spectrum. And the whole idea, of course, is to create some level of reality as to what is really possible. How well can we pattern these deer? And like I mentioned in preview number 1, this is a series that I'm producing exclusively for the My Outdoor TV platform. So if you want to check it out, there's a link in the description, and they've got a free trial. You can see what's there, and there's a lot of other stuff on their channel too. Like I said, if you're interested, click the link in the description, but let's get right to the preview. Welcome to the second episode of Patterning Trophy Whitetails. As I mentioned last week, this is a 10-part series, so we've got 8 more weeks, 8 more episodes after this one. The focus is going to be on taking you along as I pattern the bucks on my farm and walk you through that process. Hopefully I'll find a couple of good ones to hunt, and then we'll move into a second series called Rut Hunting Strategies, and that's going to follow the same type of format, very close to live production, as close to the days when we actually film the action as possible. We're going to post it here on My Outdoor TV. So I'm going to talk in this episode, let's see, last week I talked about the summer range to fall range shift, and I mentioned the fact that I don't get super serious about patterning until early in September. So we've got a few more weeks here that we can cover other topics. And I wanted to talk about the whole patterning process, how it works, but more specifically, what is realistic? What can we expect to accomplish? What does it really mean to pattern a mature whitetail? The biggest challenge, of course, is having those deer to hunt in the first place. So I can't help you with that if there aren't a few of them around. You know, having places to hunt where at least you have a couple of bucks that you're excited about, then the patterning process kicks in. So let's talk about 2 different bucks that I hunted in the past. One was a deer that, gosh, I hunted that deer for 4 seasons, and he was on one extreme end of the spectrum. That buck was super patternable. I would say by the time I ended up shooting him in 2012, he was probably the easiest buck on the whole farm to find. And that's pretty rare. And then the other buck wasn't exactly the opposite. I've hunted some bucks that were really, really hard to pattern. Bucks that had huge ranges, they weren't home bodies even as they got older. A lot of bucks as they get older, their ranges start to compress and get smaller, but I've hunted some that didn't happen. So anyway, let's take another buck that's somewhere closer to that end of the spectrum, the harder to pattern end, but not impossible. And this was a deer that I killed in 2019. And so let's talk about the first one. And I'm not going to take you through the year when I actually shot the buck. That was 2012. The most interesting year was 2011. And I'm going to walk you through what the patterning process looked like for that deer in 2011. He was 6 years old that year. In my experience, when they hit that age, they become more visible, a lot of times more daylight active, and surprisingly easier to hunt, because he had been like a ghost as a 4 and 5 year old buck. I tried to hunt him those years and just really had no success whatsoever. A little bit at age 4, but I didn't even see him at age 5, and I hunted him I think for 50 straight days. That was painful. I vowed I would never do that again. Well, then he pops up on my trail camera in mid-September of 2011, just shed his velvet, gigantic rack, and I thought, oh no, here we go again. I'm going to spend my whole season hunting a ghost. But the light switch had flipped on this buck. He went from being a ghost to being just the opposite, super visible. The first time I saw him on the hoof was on the 9th of November in 2011, and I thought we were going to get him. He was coming in, he was following a doe, and right at the last second, another buck, another really big buck on the farm came and ran him off. And then after running him off, that buck came back looking for the doe. I ended up shooting him. You know, there was a part of me that really wanted to let that deer go and see if the giant would come along later, you know, on the same trail. But man, you got a buck like this in front of you, I couldn't pass him up. So anyway, that was my second. In Iowa, I can kill 2 bucks prior to the late season. So that was my second tag, my second buck in 2011. So I had to sit out until the late season. So even though I had this giant buck on the farm, I wasn't able to hunt him. But I was running a lot of trail cameras, you know, especially in that area where he'd been living. And I found him back almost every single day, a lot of times in daylight. One of the strategies that really stuck out to me at that time, and I hadn't really explored hunting out of blinds much, but I knew how challenging it was to hunt these feeding areas from tree stands, because the bucks tend to come into them from all different directions. They may end up in the same spot just about every evening, but they can come from almost 360 degrees, depending upon, of course, where they bed. Let's just say 180 degrees. They can come from a lot of different spots to enter that feeding area. So I got the idea that I needed a blind, and I didn't want just any blind. There weren't any good ones on the market back then. You know, since then I've you know, started working with redneck blinds, and I've been super happy with those. But prior to that time, there wasn't anything that I really wanted to hunt out of. So we built one, and that thing was an absolute monstrosity. It had 2 stories. The upper story was where the cameraman, he had to lay down, but he could run the camera up there. We had windows all the way around the top story, so he could get unobstructed video without having to film around me in any direction that he wanted to point the camera. So in the downstairs, I had these way too small windows. I don't know what we were thinking. I guess we were trying to minimize the amount of window space that might let scent out, because the idea was to seal everything up, hold our scent in. We wheeled this thing out onto the field around mid-December. And this buck had been using that field just consistently. I had all kinds of pictures of him, even in daylight, coming out there. But I thought, well, I've got to get this blind in place. Let's just see what happens. So I wheeled the blind out there, and it took the buck 10 days. I remember running 2 cameras, one pointing in one direction off the blind and one pointing in the other direction, trail cameras. And it was a deer that was in front of one of the cameras that triggered it, but in the background I could see this giant crossing a long ways out. So that was, I think that was when he disappeared. He didn't show up again after that. He didn't like the blind for 10 days before he popped back up on the cameras again. So people ask me, how long does it take for deer to get used to a blind? I mean, I don't really know, but I always fall back on that 10 days now is kind of my standard answer. So once he started coming back on the trail cameras, I started hunting him. But I wasn't just doing this sort of randomly. This was before cell cameras. I was going in there every day during the middle of the day. I'd sneak in there, and like I said, I had one camera point in one direction and one camera point in the other. I'd pull the cards out of both. I'd go back to my office. I'd throw them in the computer, check them to see if he was, showing up in daylight yet. And finally he did. I don't remember the exact date. It was towards the end of December though. So that's when we started hunting him. And it was really interesting to have a 200+ inch buck that you could go hunt, knowing that just about every time you went back there, let's say a 50% chance that that deer was going to be out on that field. Sometimes he was the first buck out or the first deer out. Like I said, he became one of the easiest deer on the whole farm to hunt. I had a crack at him twice. One time he came in and I think I spooked another deer when I opened one of those little small windows to shoot out of, and then he ran off. And then a few days later, just not very many days later, he came back. He didn't really like the blind and he skirted around it 30 yards away. I stopped him. I didn't aim low, didn't play the drop. I might have made a little bit of a poor shot too. I mean, there was a lot of adrenaline going at that moment, but he definitely dropped. I hit him high in the neck and he ran off. Obviously that didn't kill him. And a few days later, maybe it was 10 days later, he was back on the camera again and looked no worse for wear, but my season was over. I'll come back again at some point. Gosh, you can hear the police. Yeah, I'm at my house here. I'm not at the farm today, but yeah, it's quite a lot of activity going on out here. I don't think they're coming for me. So where was I? Oh yeah, we're talking about the fact that the buck got away in 2011, but the lessons were learned. There was a lot of patterning that went into that buck. A lot of time spent trying to nail him down, pin him down, get his behavior really cleaned up and well understood. That buck was also unique because I ran a lot of other cameras around what I thought was his core area. I think I had 5 or 6 cameras, and I only got him on cameras that were within a really small area. He didn't venture out of about 40 acres, believe it or not. Very daylight active in about 30 to 40 acres. So obviously he was, a real easy buck to hunt. So you learn that stuff by two ways. One is running a lot of cameras, paying attention to what you can pick up on each one of these cameras. Learning as much as you possibly can from the photos. Not just, okay, there's my buck, but what direction is he coming from? What direction does he leave? How does he interact with the other deer? Lots of information that could lead you to understand better not only his core area, where he beds, where he feeds, but also his personality, how to hunt him. How dominant is he? Is he going to react to calling? There's just a lot of things you can learn about that buck. Like I said, I did kill him in 2012, but that's a story for another day. We're not going to get into that now. This buck was an example of a deer with a personality that made him very patternable. He was on the very far end of the extreme of being patternable. I learned a lot from that buck, but he was very unique. Once in a lifetime kind of a deer. So now let's look at another one. This was a deer that I killed in 2019. And the first time I encountered the buck, gosh, I think it was 2016 on the same field where I killed him, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together until later. He was a really, really big 2-year-old in 2016. I kept thinking, man, I can't wait to see that deer when he gets older. Well, somehow this buck kept slipping through the net. I didn't photograph him, I don't believe, on any of my trail cameras in 2017. In 2018, I picked him up a couple of times, and one morning, after a morning hunt, we were sneaking back away from the blind that we were hunting, and we saw him following some does across a bean field. He looked really, really good. but I knew he was too young. I didn't know exactly how old he was, but just looking at his body and just, you know, being unsure of this deer, I thought, wow, what a great buck to see 1 year later. Then I started going back through my trail cam photos, and I found pictures of him in 2018, probably a half a mile away from this spot. This deer, he had a pretty good sized range. I didn't have him dialed in very well. It just kind of was on my radar. But then after that year, after 2018, I thought, man, in 2019, I'm gonna go after this buck. I'm gonna hunt him. I'm gonna find him. I'm gonna pattern him. He's gonna be my #1 target. I couldn't find him in 2019. I ran cameras in the standard places, all the spots where I thought that I was gonna pick this deer up. Never once picked up a single photo of him. So here I am, October 23rd, going to hunt that same spot where he had come out in 2016 as a young buck, and very close to the spot where we'd seen him in 2018 when he was following those does across that bean field. It was more just a relaxing October 23rd kind of a hunt. You know, we didn't have any big expectations. The buck pops out probably half an hour before the end of legal shooting time, and both myself and the cameraman were just slack-jawed. we couldn't believe that a deer like that was in this area, and we didn't know it. Well, you know, I got the shot and was able to make a good shot on him. I mean, gigantic deer. Then we started afterwards putting the pieces together. You know, 2 and 2 were starting to add up to 4. This was the same buck from 2016. This was the buck from 2018 that came out in the field nearby. He was the deer that I had a few trail cam pictures from back in 2018, but couldn't pin down. So I ended up killing what we called him the surprise buck. So I ended up killing him anyway. Got lucky there, or, you know, you can say whatever you like, but I didn't have that deer patterned. That's the point. Sometimes it works, and you can really get a tight feel for how a deer behaves, and sometimes it just doesn't really work that well. You know, sometimes the buck's personality is such that they just, maybe they're a little bit bigger roamers, or maybe they have a range that is pretty small, you just don't know where it is. Every buck is different. You can pattern some easily, some not as easily. So what is realistic? You know, as we're going into this whole 10 episode series about patterning, what do I hope to achieve at the end? What is a reasonable hope? What is a expectation of success? For me, the expectation of success is to find bucks that I'm interested in hunting, to figure out where they're living, something about their patterns, ideally maybe where they're bedding, more in relation to their core areas, but just as importantly, I want to find bucks that are daylight active. This can be really discouraging, as I learned hunting that buck in 2010, where I hunted him for 50 plus straight days and never saw him. It can be really frustrating to hunt bucks that aren't daylight active. So those are the keys to patterning. If you're hoping to find out what that deer does moment by moment, you're probably going to be disappointed with this whole process. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave you with this episode. But we'll explore this concept a lot more, about the fact that every buck is different. Patterning success is not a simple thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Every buck that you go after is going to be unique. And I think that's what's most fascinating about it. You'll learn some really cool stuff about deer when you try to match wits with one specific individual deer. And I think that's why I enjoy it so much. So hopefully I can relate that type of enthusiasm and that kind of excitement throughout this whole series. And I also hope that by the end of it, I'm going to bring you some really good bucks that I'm going to be hunting this fall. Well, I appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Patterning Trophy Whitetails. I seem to have ran all of the semi-tame deer out of my yard by talking here at full volume 15 yards away. I only wish the deer on the farm were this easy to get close to. So once again, the My Outdoor TV platform is really dedicated to hunters and fishermen. I want to try to help these guys as much as I can. I've spent a lot of years working for this company in a roundabout way. They owned and still own the Sportsman Channel, Outdoor Channel, They owned a lot of the different magazines that I wrote for, all the Game and Fish, North American Whitetail, Peterson's Bow Hunting, Bow Hunter. These were all magazines that I wrote for very prolifically back in the day. So anyway, if you want to see the rest of the series, check it out at My Outdoor TV. Well, I appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. And remember to always dream big.